On a night when the river rose higher than it ever should, a child vanished without a trace. No body, no footprints, just silence, and water that kept moving as if nothing had happened. Years later, that child returned as a broken soldier, with nothing but a German shepherd who refused to leave his side. But the strange part is this. The dog kept leading him back to the same stretch of forest, digging in places no one remembered, stopping at a river that had already changed its course, and buried beneath it all was proof that someone had been searching for him all along. Tonight's story is not just about what was lost, it's about what refused to be forgotten. Before we begin, thank you for being here. Wherever you're watching from, I hope peace finds you tonight, and that no heart walks alone in the dark. If stories like this speak to you, take a moment to subscribe and become part of this journey. The storm did not arrive like weather. It arrived like a warning. Rain pressed down on the Appalachian forest in heavy sheets, wind bending tall pines until they groaned, and the river below swelled beyond its banks, dark and restless, as if something inside it had awakened. The cabin stood too close to the water. It was small, built from rough timber, its foundation worn by years of rain and neglect. Inside, a young family slept lightly, used to storms, but not to the sound that came next. It was not thunder. It was wood splitting under pressure. Water forced its way through the door. Cold, sudden, violent. A man lunged from the bed, his instincts faster than thought. He was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, with rough hands shaped by labor and a face that carried quiet exhaustion rather than age. He reached for the child first. That was all that mattered. But the current moved faster than any human body could. A woman screamed. She was slender, her long dark hair tangled across her face, her skin pale in the flashing light of the storm. There was strength in her, the kind that came from loving deeply and fearing quietly. But in that moment, it was not enough. Her arms reached out into water that did not stop. The boy slipped from her grasp. No one saw where he went. The river took him without hesitation, folding him into its darkness, carrying him into the forest beyond the cabin, beyond the reach of voices that would call his name until their throats burned raw. By morning, the storm was gone. The sky cleared too quickly, as if it had nothing to answer for. The river settled back into its banks, moving quietly again, leaving behind mud, broken branches, and silence. Search teams came, boots pressed into wet earth, voices echoed through the trees. Men called out, again and again, refusing to believe what the water had already decided. But there was no child, only a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, and footprints that ended at the edge of the river. Miles away, deeper in the forest, where the current had dragged debris and broken limbs, something small remained hidden beneath the roots of a fallen tree. Jack Miller found him. Jack was a man shaped by years of work that paid too little and demanded too much. 48 years old, tall, thick through the shoulders, with a beard touched by gray and eyes that rarely showed surprise. He was not easily shaken. Life had made sure of that. But something in him had softened over time, worn down not by weakness, but by endurance. He stopped walking before he understood why. There was a stillness ahead. Not the quiet of the forest, but something heavier, something that did not belong. "Sarah," he called, his voice low, controlled. Sarah Miller stepped forward beside him. She was in her mid-40s, tall and slender, her posture slightly bent from years spent leaning over patients in a small rural clinic. Her brown hair, threaded with early strands of gray, was tied loosely at the back. Her face was gentle but lined, marked by a life spent worrying for others more than herself. There was a steadiness in her hands that came from experience, but her eyes betrayed how much she felt. Then she saw the child. A small body, curled tightly beneath the exposed roots, half buried in mud and leaves. Too still, too quiet. Sarah dropped to her knees without hesitation. Her hands moved quickly, brushing away dirt, pressing lightly against the boy's chest, searching for something she feared might not be there. Cold skin, barely a pulse. Her breath caught, but her training held. "He's alive," she whispered, though it sounded more like a plea than a statement. Jack didn't ask questions. He removed his coat and wrapped it around the boy, lifting him carefully. The child was lighter than he should have been. That weightlessness felt wrong. It settled into Jack's chest, like something he could not name. They moved fast. Through mud, over broken branches, slipping, catching themselves, refusing to slow down. The forest seemed longer on the way back, as if it wanted to hold on to what it had almost claimed. Inside their cabin, Sarah took control. Wet clothes were stripped away, blankets layered, the fire stoked higher. Her hands trembled once, just once, before she steadied them again. She leaned close, listening to the boy's breathing, counting each shallow rise of his chest. "Stay with me," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. "You're not alone." Hours passed without measure. Jack stood nearby, silent, his hands opening and closing at his sides. He had no training for this, no words that would fix it, only presence. Slowly, something changed. The boy's breathing deepened. Color returned, faint but real. Life, fragile and stubborn, refused to leave. When his eyes finally opened, they did not move like a child's. They did not search for comfort. They watched, dark, wide, and distant, as if whatever he had seen in the water had not let him go. Sarah offered him a cup of warm broth, her hands steady now. "You're safe," she said gently. The boy said nothing, but his fingers tightened slightly around the blanket, as if some small part of him understood the word, even if the rest did not. Days turned into weeks. Searches continued, then faded. No one came. No missing reports matched. No voices returned to claim him. It was as if the river had erased everything before that night. But not everything. At night, the boy woke suddenly, gasping, his hands clawing at the air as if fighting something unseen. When rain touched the roof, he froze, his entire body still, listening. Always listening. And somewhere beyond the trees, the river moved on, quiet again, as if it had already decided what to take and what to leave behind. The name came quietly, almost like a decision neither of them fully understood. It happened one evening by the fire, when the boy sat on the floor, watching the flames with a stillness that felt older than his small body. Sarah spoke it first, soft and careful, as if testing whether the word would fit him. "Ethan." The boy did not respond, but he did not turn away either. That was enough. From that night on, he had a name, even if it did not belong to anything he could remember. Ethan did not ask questions. That was the first thing Sarah noticed. Most children would have cried, would have searched for something familiar, would have clung to any explanation offered to them. Ethan did none of that. He moved through the cabin slowly, cautiously, as if every object carried a hidden meaning he had yet to understand. His eyes followed shadows. His attention lingered on sounds others ignored. When Jack entered a room, Ethan's posture shifted slightly. Not in fear, but in awareness, like someone preparing for something that might happen. Jack tried not to show how much that unsettled him. He was a man who believed in simple things, in work that could be finished, and problems that could be solved with the right tools. But there was nothing simple about a child who watched the world as if it might break at any moment. Jack had grown up hard, raised by a father who believed silence was strength and softness was a weakness that got people hurt. He had carried that lesson into his own life, into the way he worked, the way he spoke, the way he endured. But with Ethan, that kind of hardness felt wrong. So instead, he taught the only way he knew how to care, through action. He showed Ethan how to stack wood, small hands learning to follow the rhythm of something steady. He taught him how to hold a tool properly, how to fix a loose hinge, how to carry weight without letting it carry you. Ethan learned quickly, too quickly. He did not make the usual mistakes children made. He observed first, then acted, precise and controlled, as if failure was something he had already experienced enough of. Sarah saw a different side. Where Jack offered structure, she offered warmth. She sat with Ethan during meals, speaking gently even when he did not answer. She brushed his hair back when it fell into his eyes, her touch light, patient, never forcing contact, but never withdrawing it either. She noticed how he lingered near her without realizing it, how he followed her from room to room, not out of need, but out of something quieter, something deeper. The nights were the hardest. It began without warning. Ethan would wake suddenly, his body rigid, breath sharp and uneven, as if he had been pulled from deep water. He never screamed. That was what made it worse. His silence filled the room more completely than any sound could. His hands clawed at the blanket, his chest rising too fast, eyes wide but not seeing anything in front of him. Sarah would sit beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You're safe," she would whisper again and again, the words steady even when her voice trembled beneath them. Sometimes, after long minutes that felt like hours, Ethan would lean slightly toward her, just enough to suggest he heard her, even if he did not fully believe it. Rain made everything worse. The first time it happened, Ethan froze in the middle of the room, his entire body still as the sound of water touched the roof. His eyes shifted toward the door, then the windows, then the floor, as if measuring distance, calculating escape. Jack saw it and felt something tighten in his chest. This was not fear learned in the moment. This was memory, buried too deep for words. When spring came, Sarah insisted Ethan attend the local school. The building was small, old, with paint peeling from its walls and desks that had been used by generations of children who all seemed to know each other. Ethan did not belong there. That was clear from the first day. Mrs. Langford, the teacher, was a woman in her late 50s, short and sturdy, with silver hair cut neatly at her jawline and sharp blue eyes that missed very little. She had taught in that classroom for over 30 years and believed she understood children. Ethan unsettled her in a way she could not explain. He listened too closely, watched too carefully. When she asked him simple questions, He either did not answer or responded in ways that suggested he was thinking about something else entirely. The other children noticed too. There was a boy named Caleb Turner, bigger than the rest, already carrying the confidence of someone who had never been told no. His blonde hair was always messy, his grin careless, his movements loud. He tested Ethan the way boys like him always did, with small pushes at first, words whispered just loud enough to be heard. "Where'd you come from?" Caleb asked one day, shoving Ethan's shoulder lightly. Ethan did not respond. "Cat got your tongue." Caleb laughed, louder now, drawing the attention of others. Then came the push that sent Ethan stumbling into a shallow puddle near the edge of the yard. Water soaked through his clothes instantly. For a moment, everything stopped. Ethan did not get up. His hands pressed into the mud, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on the water spreading around him. Something in his expression changed. Not anger, not fear, but something hollow, something distant. Caleb's laughter faded. The other children stepped back without understanding why. Ethan stood slowly. He did not look at Caleb. He did not speak, but there was something in his stillness that made no one touch him again that day. Years passed like that, quiet and uneven. Ethan grew taller, stronger, his body shaped by work and routine. He spoke more, but never more than necessary. He learned what was expected of him and did it without complaint. But the feeling never left him. The sense that he was standing just outside something everyone else seemed to belong to. At night, he still listened to the rain, and somewhere deep inside him, the river was still moving. Ethan left on a gray morning that felt unfinished, as if the sky itself was holding something back. The road out of the valley stretched ahead in long, quiet lines, disappearing into hills that had watched him grow without ever answering who he was. He did not look back, not because he did not care, but because he had learned early that looking back did not change what stayed behind. At 18, Ethan had already learned how to endure. That was what the recruiters saw first. Not strength in the obvious sense, but a kind of stillness under pressure that could not be taught. He stood taller than most, his frame lean but solid, built from years of labor rather than training. His face had sharpened with age, jawline defined, eyes steady and unreadable. There was no arrogance in him, no need to prove himself out loud. That made people underestimate him. It also made them follow him. Basic training stripped away what little softness remained. Men shouted, pushed, broke others down to rebuild them into something harder. Ethan did not resist the process. He adapted. Where others burned out, he narrowed his focus. Where others panicked, he slowed his breathing, grounded himself in movement, in repetition. Pain did not surprise him. It felt familiar, like something he had carried long before he wore a uniform. It was during advanced training that he met Daniel Reeves, a man who could not have been more different from him. Reeves was broad and muscular, his blonde hair always cut too short, his laughter loud enough to fill a room. He had a way of talking that made strangers feel like old friends, and a habit of masking fear with humor that never quite fooled Ethan. Beneath that easy confidence was someone who had seen just enough hardship to know what it meant, but not enough to accept it quietly. Reeves chose to fight against it. Ethan endured it. "You ever smile?" Reeves asked once, dropping beside him after a long run, chest heaving but grin still intact. Ethan glanced at him briefly. "When there's a reason." Reeves laughed, shaking his head. Man, you're going to be trouble out there. The quiet ones always are. They were assigned to the same unit. In the field, differences mattered less. What mattered was trust, and trust came from consistency. Ethan became the one who noticed things others missed. A shift in the wind, a sound out of place, the tension in someone's voice just before something went wrong. He did not lead by speaking. He led by acting when it mattered. Months turned into deployments. Heat replaced cold. Sand replaced trees. The world became a series of missions defined by objectives, timelines, and risks that could not always be measured. Ethan adapted again. He learned the rhythm of it, the way danger built slowly before it struck, the way silence could be more threatening than noise. Reeves stayed close. Where Ethan was quiet, Reeves filled the gaps, talking through long nights, telling stories that blurred truth and exaggeration in equal measure. He reminded Ethan of something he had almost forgotten, what it meant to feel human in moments that demanded the opposite. The mission that changed everything came without warning. It was supposed to be routine. A sweep through a narrow valley where intelligence suggested minimal resistance. The terrain was uneven, scattered with broken structures and debris left behind from conflicts no one spoke about anymore. Ethan moved near the rear, as he always did, watching the edges, the places others overlooked. The first shot came from behind. Not loud, not dramatic, just sudden. Reeves went down. Ethan turned immediately, no hesitation. The world narrowed to one point, Reeves on the ground, clutching his side, breath uneven, eyes wide but still aware. "I'm good," Reeves said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just a scratch." It wasn't. Blood spread too quickly. Ethan moved through the chaos, blocking out everything else. He lifted Reeves, pulling him onto his shoulder with a strength that came from necessity, not effort. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, the ground unstable beneath them. "Go," Reeves muttered, voice tighter now. "You gotta go." Ethan didn't answer. He never had. The second explosion hit before they reached cover. The force threw Ethan forward, slamming him into the ground. Sound disappeared. Light fractured. For a moment, there was nothing but pressure and weight and the distant sense that something had gone wrong. When he opened his eyes, the world had already moved on. Voices shouted somewhere beyond him. Movement blurred at the edges of his vision. He pushed himself up, disoriented, searching. Reeves was no longer beside him. They found him later. Too late. Ethan stood there unmoving, as others spoke around him, their voices distant, meaningless. He did not react the way they expected. No anger, no visible grief, just a stillness that settled deeper than anything he had felt before. That night, he sat alone. For the first time in years, he could hear something clearly. Not the desert wind, not distant gunfire. Water. It filled his ears, his thoughts, rising and falling in a rhythm he could not escape. He closed his eyes, but it didn't stop. He had gone back. He had tried, and it had not been enough. That truth stayed with him longer than any mission. Ethan did not become colder after that. He became quieter, more precise, more aware of the line between what could be controlled and what could not. He continued to serve, continued to move forward, continued to be the man others relied on when things went wrong. But something had shifted, not because he had failed, but because he had learned in the hardest way possible that even when you do everything right, you can still lose someone. And there is no training for that. Ethan returned to the valley without ceremony, stepping off a worn bus with a single duffel bag and the same quiet expression he had carried through years of war. The mountains looked unchanged, but something in the air felt heavier, as if time had settled into the wood and soil while he was gone. The road to the Miller cabin stretched ahead, familiar but distant, like a memory he had never fully owned. Jack had aged. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. The man still stood tall, his shoulders broad, but the weight of years had pressed into his posture. His beard had turned more gray than brown, and the lines on his face had deepened, carved by weather and work and something unspoken. Jack did not smile when he saw Ethan. He simply nodded once, stepping forward and placing a firm hand on his shoulder, a gesture that carried more meaning than any words. Sarah was different. She had grown thinner, her frame more fragile than Ethan remembered. Her hair, once only touched with gray, had faded almost completely, soft strands falling loosely around her face. But her eyes remained the same, warm, searching, filled with a quiet strength that had not diminished. When she hugged him, it was gentle, careful, as if she feared he might break, or perhaps as if she knew he already had. Ethan stayed, not because he had a plan, but because there was nowhere else that made sense. The days settled into routine, but it was not the kind of routine that brought comfort. Ethan worked wherever work was offered. Repairing engines in a dim garage owned by a man named Carl Benson, a heavy-set mechanic in his late 50s with oil permanently embedded in his skin and a voice that carried impatience more often than kindness. Carl respected effort, nothing more. That suited Ethan fine. There were no questions in the garage, no expectations beyond finishing the job. Other days, Ethan hauled lumber, fixed fences, cleared debris from land no one had the time or strength to manage. His hands returned to what they knew best, labor that demanded focus but not reflection. It was easier that way, but the nights remained difficult. Sleep came in fragments. His body rested, but his mind did not. Sounds carried too far. A creak in the house, the shift of wind through trees, even silence itself felt like something waiting to be broken. And sometimes, when the rain returned, the memory followed, not as images, but as sensation. Cold, pressure, the feeling of being pulled somewhere he could not see. Weeks passed like that, quiet, repetitive, empty, until the day he found the dog. It was behind an abandoned storage shed near the edge of town, a place most people ignored. The structure leaned slightly, its wood warped and cracked, the ground around it dry and neglected. Ethan had been hired to clear the area, nothing more than another job to fill the hours. He heard the chain before he saw the animal, a low metallic drag against wood, then movement. The dog stepped into view slowly. A German shepherd, large but underweight, its ribs faintly visible beneath a coat of black and tan fur that had lost its shine. One ear stood fully upright, the other slightly tilted, giving it an asymmetrical look that might have seemed almost gentle if not for the intensity in its gaze. Its eyes were amber-brown, sharp, alert, watching Ethan with a focus that felt deliberate rather than afraid. The chain around its neck was thick, rusted at the edges, attached to a metal post driven into the ground. There was no water bowl nearby, no sign of recent care. Ethan crouched slightly, not approaching too fast. The dog did not bark, did not growl. It simply watched. From behind the shed, a man appeared, wiping his hands on a stained rag. He was tall but narrow, his posture slouched, his face unshaven, with a thin mustache that did little to hide the neglect in his appearance. His name was Roy Calder, a man known around town more for what he avoided than what he accomplished. He had a way of speaking that suggested he expected disappointment before it arrived. That thing? Roy shrugged when he saw Ethan looking. Ain't worth much. Won't listen. Keeps staring off like it's thinking too much for a dog. Ethan said nothing. Roy continued, his tone dismissive. Tried to train it, waste of time. If you want it, take it. Saves me the trouble. Ethan stepped closer. The dog's body tensed, but it did not retreat. Up close, the details were clearer. Scars along its side. Faint, but visible. Signs of rough handling, not recent, but not forgotten either. The animal was not broken. It was waiting. Ethan reached for the chain. For a brief moment, the dog's gaze sharpened, searching his face, measuring something deeper than movement. Then Ethan unhooked it. The chain fell away with a dull sound. The dog did not run. It stayed exactly where it was, watching him. Roy laughed under his breath. Told you. Stubborn. Ethan straightened, turning back toward his work. After a few steps, he heard it. Soft, controlled. Footsteps behind him. He did not turn around. He did not need to. From that moment on, the dog followed. At the cabin, Sarah noticed first. Her eyes softened as she looked at the animal, taking in its condition with the same instinct she had used years ago. He's been through something, she said quietly, kneeling slightly, letting the dog approach at its own pace. Jack observed from a distance, arms crossed, his gaze steady. If it stays, he said, it works. The dog stepped closer to Ethan, not out of fear, not out of need, but as if it had made a decision. Ethan looked down at it for a long moment, then nodded almost to himself. Max, he said. The name settled between them, simple, solid. The dog's ears shifted slightly, as if acknowledging something it did not yet understand. That night, for the first time since returning, Ethan slept longer than a few hours, not because the world had changed, but because something beside him refused to let it feel empty. Two creatures, both left behind in different ways, now sharing the same quiet space, not bonded by trust, not yet, but moving in the same direction. Spring arrived without asking permission. Snow retreated in uneven patches, exposing dark soil beneath, and the forest began to breathe again, slow and cautious, as if unsure the storms were truly over. The river, once swollen and violent, now moved in a quieter rhythm, but there was something deceptive about its calm, something that made Ethan watch it longer than he intended. Max noticed it first. In the weeks since he had come into Ethan's life, the German Shepherd had changed. His coat, once dull and tangled, had begun to regain its sheen, black and tan fur catching light again. His body filled out with proper food and rest, muscles rebuilding into a lean, powerful frame. But it was not his strength that stood out. It was his attention. Max did not move without purpose. His ears tracked sounds long before they reached human awareness, and his eyes carried a kind of steady intelligence that made it seem as if he understood more than he showed. That morning, Ethan had planned nothing more than a walk. Work had been slow, and the weight of idle time pressed heavier than labor ever had. He needed movement, something to keep his thoughts from settling too deeply into places he did not want to revisit. Max walked beside him, silent, matching his pace without command. They reached the edge of the old forest before Ethan realized where he was going. He stopped. The trees stood taller here, older, their trunks marked by time and weather. The ground was uneven, shaped by years of erosion and change. Somewhere beyond them, hidden by distance and memory, lay the place where everything had begun. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I didn't mean to come this way," he murmured, though he was not sure if he was speaking to himself or the dog. Max had already moved ahead. Not far, but enough to break their usual rhythm. His posture shifted, ears forward, body alert, tail held level. He was tracking something. Ethan followed, his steps slower now, more deliberate. The deeper they moved into the forest, the quieter it became. Even the wind seemed to hesitate among the branches. Then Max stopped. He stood near a bend in the river where the current had carved a new path over the years. The bank was uneven. The earth collapsed inward in places, exposing layers of soil that told a story of movement and force. This was not the river Ethan remembered. It had changed, reshaped itself, leaving behind fragments of what once existed. Max lowered his head and began to dig. At first it was controlled, measured. Then it became urgent. Soil scattered behind him in quick bursts. His breathing deepened, his movements sharper, as if something beneath the ground demanded to be uncovered. "Max!" Ethan called, stepping closer. The dog did not stop. There was a low sound in his throat. Not a growl, but something close. Something that carried tension without aggression. Ethan knelt beside him. The earth was softer here, darker, mixed with fragments of wood and stone that did not belong naturally. He brushed away loose dirt with his hands, ignoring the cold that seeped into his skin. Then he saw it. A piece of timber. Old. Worn. Edges splintered from force rather than time. He pulled it free, revealing more beneath it. Another piece. Then another. The shape began to form in his mind before it fully emerged from the ground. A foundation. Or what remained of one. Ethan's breath slowed. His hands stilled. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted. Not a memory. Not yet. Just a sensation. Water. Cold and endless. The sound of it filled his ears, not from the river beside him, but from somewhere inside his own mind. He closed his eyes briefly, and for a moment, the world tilted. A flash. Not clear, not complete. Darkness. Movement. A feeling of being pulled, of something slipping beyond reach. Ethan opened his eyes quickly, grounding himself in the present. Max had stopped digging. He stood still now, watching the exposed ground, his chest rising and falling steadily. When Ethan looked at him, the dog's gaze lifted, meeting his with a focus that felt almost intentional. "What is it?" Ethan asked quietly. Max did not move, but he did not look away either. The river shifted beside them, its current brushing against the altered bank with a low, steady sound. Ethan turned toward it. The water looked harmless, clear in places, shallow near the edges, but he knew better. He stepped closer, his boots pressing into the damp soil. The closer he moved, the stronger the sensation became. Not fear, not exactly. Something older, something that had never fully left him. His breath tightened. For a moment, he felt it again. The pull, the weight, the absence of ground beneath his feet. Ethan stepped back. Quickly, the feeling receded, but it did not disappear entirely. Max moved then, positioning himself between Ethan and the river, his body angled slightly. Not aggressive, but firm, protective. Ethan noticed. He let out a slow breath, running a hand over the back of his neck. This place, he said, his voice quieter now. I've been here before. The words felt strange, not because they were uncertain, but because they were. For the first time, Ethan was not just sensing something. He was beginning to understand that what he felt had a source, and that source was here, beneath the earth, beside the water, waiting. The wind picked up slightly, moving through the trees with a low, whispering sound. Max stepped closer to Ethan, his presence steady, grounding. Ethan looked back at the partially uncovered structure, then at the river beyond it. Whatever had happened here, it had not been erased, only buried. And now, piece by piece, it was beginning to surface again. The town of Briar Hollow sat quietly at the edge of the mountains, the kind of place that did not grow, did not change, and did not forget. Its main road stretched no more than a mile, lined with buildings that leaned slightly with age. An old diner, a hardware store, a sheriff's office that looked more like a house than a place of authority. It was the kind of town where stories lingered long after the people who lived them were gone. Ethan parked his truck near the county records building, a narrow structure with faded brick walls and a single wooden door that creaked when pushed open. Max stepped out beside him, his movements calm but alert, amber eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with quiet precision. The dog stayed close, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Inside, the air smelled of paper and time. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, their metal surfaces worn from decades of use. Behind a desk near the back sat Margaret Hensley. She was a woman in her late 60s, small in stature but solid in presence, with short silver hair neatly parted and tucked behind her ears. Her glasses rested low on her nose, and her eyes, sharp and observant, carried the kind of focus that came from a lifetime of paying attention to details others overlooked. Her hands moved slowly but deliberately, fingers slightly bent from age but still steady. She looked up as Ethan entered. Her gaze shifted briefly to Max, noting the dog's posture, the way he stood not as a pet, but as something closer to a partner. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm, measured, not unkind. Ethan stepped forward, removing a folded piece of cloth from his jacket pocket. It was old, worn thin at the edges, the same fragment Sarah had kept all these years. "I'm looking for records," he said, "from a flood, years back." Margaret studied him for a moment before responding. There was something in his tone, something restrained, that made her take the question seriously. "We've had more than a few floods," she replied. "You'll have to be more specific." Ethan hesitated, not because he didn't know what to say, but because saying it made it real. "A child," he said finally. "Lost. Never found." Margaret's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise. Recognition. She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands together as she thought. "There was one," she said slowly. "Long time ago. Not from this town exactly, but close enough that we kept the file." She stood, moving toward the back room with careful steps, her movements unhurried but purposeful. Max watched her go, ears flicking once, then settled again, his attention returning to Ethan. Minutes passed. The quiet stretched. Ethan's eyes drifted across the room, but he wasn't seeing the shelves or the papers. He was listening, not to the sounds around him, but to something deeper, something that had begun to surface since returning to the forest. Water. Always water. Margaret returned with a thin folder. She placed it on the desk between them and opened it carefully, as if what was inside required respect. "The Harrisons," she said. "Thomas and Eliza Harrison. Lived just outside the valley, near the old river bend before it shifted." Ethan's chest tightened. Margaret continued. "They had a son, 4 years old. Went missing during a flood. Search parties went out for days. Volunteers from 3 towns. They didn't stop." Her finger moved along the page, tracing lines of faded ink. "They kept looking long after everyone else gave up," she said. "Thomas organized his own searches, went back into the forest again and again, even when the ground wasn't safe." Ethan swallowed, his jaw tightening slightly. "What happened to them?" he asked. Margaret's eyes softened, but her voice remained steady. 2 years later, there was an accident. Mountain road, icy conditions. Their truck went off the edge. No survivors. The words settled into the room like something heavy. Ethan didn't move. Didn't react the way most would expect. But something inside him shifted deeper than emotion, closer to understanding. "They never found the boy," Margaret added quietly. "But they never stopped believing he was out there." Silence followed. Then Max moved. Without warning, he stepped toward the door, his posture alert, head lowered slightly as if catching a scent that did not belong to the building. Ethan noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked, stepping outside. Max led him back toward the forest edge, not far from where they had been the day before. His pace was steady, deliberate, as if retracing something he had already marked. They stopped at the base of an old tree, its roots twisted above the ground, soil packed unevenly beneath it. Max began to dig, faster than before, more urgent. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, hands moving through the dirt, uncovering something solid beneath the surface. Metal. A small box, rusted at the edges but intact. He pulled it free, brushing away soil with careful movements. The lid resisted at first, then gave. Inside were 3 items, a photograph, faded but still visible. A man and a woman stood together, their expressions open, unguarded, with a small boy between them. The child's face was partially turned, but there was enough to recognize something familiar in the shape of his eyes. A necklace. Thin chain, worn from use, with a small pendant that had been scratched nearly smooth over time, and a piece of paper. Folded, fragile. Ethan opened it slowly. A name written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Ethan Harrison. The forest seemed quiet around him. No wind, no movement. Just the weight of something that had been waiting. He looked at the photograph again, then at the name, then at the river beyond the trees. It wasn't a question anymore. It wasn't a possibility. It was truth, not given freely, not found easily, but undeniable. Ethan closed the box carefully, his hands steady despite the shift inside him. For the first time in his life, the emptiness had shape, and it had a name. The rain returned without warning. It began as a distant murmur against the mountains, a soft whisper through the trees that slowly grew into something heavier, something deliberate. By the time Ethan reached the forest, the sky had already darkened, clouds folding over one another until the light itself seemed to retreat. He should not have come back. That thought crossed his mind more than once as he stepped through the undergrowth, the damp earth shifting beneath his boots. But something stronger than caution had pulled him here. Not curiosity, not even the need for answers, something closer to gravity. Max moved beside him, quieter than usual. His gait was steady, but there was tension in his posture, a subtle tightening along his shoulders that signaled awareness. The German Shepherd was no longer the abandoned animal Ethan had found weeks ago. His coat now lay smooth against a stronger frame, black and tan fur darkened by rain, his amber eyes sharp, tracking every movement around them. He did not resist the direction Ethan chose, but he did not fully accept it either. They reached the river as the rain intensified. Water struck the surface in uneven patterns, distorting the current beneath. The river no longer looked calm. It never truly had. Now it revealed more of what it was: unpredictable, restless, alive in a way that did not care who stood near its edge. Ethan stepped closer. The ground here had changed again since the last time he stood on it. What had once been firm now felt unstable, the soil softened by moisture, roots exposed where the current had eaten away at the bank. He could feel it before it happened. The shift, a subtle give beneath his weight. Max reacted first. A low, warning sound vibrated in his chest, sharp and immediate. Ethan paused, but the moment had already passed. The ground collapsed. Not entirely, not dramatically, but enough. His foot slipped forward, the earth breaking beneath him as he lost balance. His body tilted, momentum carrying him toward the water before he could correct it. The river surged closer, too close. Time did not slow. It narrowed. The sound of rain faded into something else, something older, deeper. The same sensation returned, not as memory, but as experience. Cold, pulling, endless. Ethan's hand shot out, grasping for something solid, but his fingers found only loose soil that crumbled away instantly. His other foot slid, his weight shifting further forward. For a brief second, there was nothing beneath him, and in that second, he understood. Not with thought, but with certainty. This was how it had happened. Not a mistake, not a failure. Just a moment where the ground gave way, and no one was close enough to stop it. Then something hit him. Hard, not the water. Max. The dog launched forward with a force that came from instinct rather than decision. His jaws clamped onto the thick fabric of Ethan's jacket, teeth sinking deep enough to hold without tearing. His body twisted backward, claws digging into the unstable ground, muscles straining against the pull. Ethan felt it, the resistance, the interruption of the fall, the difference. Max did not let go. The force dragged against him, pulling him sideways instead of down. Ethan's body slammed against the bank, his elbow striking exposed roots as pain shot up his arm. But this time, there was something to hold on to. He grabbed the root, fingers locking tight. His boots found purchase barely, just enough to push against the shifting ground. Max growled, low and relentless, every muscle in his body engaged as he held his position, refusing to give even an inch. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rain fell harder. The river pressed forward, as if aware it had been denied something it had once taken without effort. Then, slowly, Ethan pulled himself back. Inches, strain, breath breaking against his ribs, until finally, his body rolled onto solid ground. They lay there, side by side, neither speaking, neither moving. Max released his grip only when Ethan's weight fully settled, but he did not step away. He stayed close, pressing against him slightly, his breathing heavy but controlled, his eyes still fixed on the edge of the river. Ethan stared upward. Rain struck his face, mixing with something warmer, something he did not recognize at first. Then he realized. Tears. He closed his eyes, but it did not stop. The sound that left him was quiet, almost lost beneath the rain, but it carried something that had been held back for years. Not anger, not fear. Release. His hand moved instinctively, finding the side of Max's neck, fingers gripping into the thick fur as if confirming what had just happened. "You didn't let go," he said, his voice uneven, raw in a way it had never been before. Max shifted slightly, his head lowering just enough to rest near Ethan's shoulder. No response. No need for one. The difference between then and now settled into Ethan's chest slowly. Before there had been nothing. No resistance, no interruption, just the fall. Now there had been something, someone, not human, not bound by expectation or memory, but present, unwavering. Ethan pushed himself up slowly, his movements careful, deliberate. He stepped back from the edge, putting distance between himself and the water, not out of fear this time, but out of understanding. He turned once more toward the river. It looked the same, but it wasn't, because he wasn't. Max stood beside him, steady, unshaken, his presence grounding in a way nothing else had been. Ethan exhaled, long and slow. For the first time, the past did not feel like something pulling him under. It felt like something he had stepped away from. And he had not done it alone. The rain did not follow Ethan home. By the time he and Max reached the edge of town, the storm had already begun to fade, leaving behind a sky that felt washed clean, as if something had been carried away with it. The mountains stood quiet again, unchanged on the outside, but Ethan no longer saw them the same way. For the first time, the weight he had carried for years did not feel like something he needed to outrun. It felt like something he could set down. The decision came slowly, not as a single moment, but as a series of small choices that began to align. Ethan did not pack his things. He did not plan a departure. Instead, he stayed. Days passed, then weeks, and the idea of leaving stopped making sense. Jack noticed first. He stood in the doorway of the cabin one morning, arms crossed, watching Ethan repair a broken fence post with steady, deliberate movements. The older man's posture was still strong, but age had settled deeper into him, his joints slower, his silence heavier. "You're not passing through anymore," Jack said, not asking, simply stating what he already understood. Ethan shook his head slightly, tightening the last bolt into place. "No," he replied. Jack nodded once. That was enough. Sarah understood differently. She watched Ethan and Max together, the way the dog moved without command, the way Ethan no longer flinched at small sounds, the way something in his shoulders had loosened, just enough to notice. She smiled more often now, though it was still quiet, still careful, as if she did not want to disturb whatever was settling into place. The building came next. It sat at the edge of Briar Hollow, a long-abandoned maintenance shed once used by the county. The structure was weathered, its wooden panels warped, the roof sagging slightly under years of neglect. Windows were cracked, doors stiff from disuse, and the ground around it uneven and overgrown. Most people saw it as something to be avoided. Ethan saw something else, possibility. He began alone, clearing debris first, broken boards, rusted tools, remnants of a purpose long forgotten. Max stayed close, moving through the space with careful inspection, his nose tracing corners, his ears shifting at every unfamiliar sound. The dog did not hesitate inside the structure. He claimed it in the quiet way animals do, not through force, but through presence. Word spread slowly. The first person to arrive was Daniel Carter. He was in his early 30s, tall but thin, his frame held together more by habit than strength. His dark hair was cut unevenly, as if he had done it himself, and his face carried the look of someone who had not slept properly in years. His eyes moved too quickly, scanning the environment with attention that never fully settled. A former Army medic, he had seen more than he had been trained to process. "I heard you work with dogs," Daniel said, his voice low, careful. Ethan glanced at Max, then back at him. "We start slow," he replied. Daniel nodded. That was enough for him. More followed. A man named Robert Hayes, a former firefighter with a permanent limp from a collapsed building. He was broad and heavy-set, his beard thick and unkempt, his voice rough but controlled. He did not talk about what had happened, but the way he moved told its own story. A teenage girl named Lily Brooks came next, small and quiet, her blonde hair always pulled into a tight braid, her posture guarded. She spoke rarely, but her eyes never stopped observing. They did not come for answers. They came because something in that place felt different. Ethan did not call it a program. He did not offer promises. He gave them work. Simple tasks, feeding schedules, cleaning routines. Small responsibilities that required attention without demanding explanation. Max became the center of it all. The German Shepherd moved through the space with calm authority, his presence steady, unthreatening. He corrected younger dogs with quiet precision, guiding rather than forcing. When someone froze, overwhelmed by something they could not explain, Max stayed with them, not touching, not pushing, just there. One afternoon, a boy arrived. He was younger than the others, no more than 8, his small frame wrapped in a jacket too large for him. His name was Aaron Blake. His dark hair fell unevenly across his forehead, and his hands remained clenched at his sides, as if he expected something to take them away at any moment. He did not speak when introduced. He barely looked at anyone. He reminded Ethan of something, not a memory, a feeling. Aaron stood near the entrance, not stepping fully inside, his body angled toward the exit, ready to leave if necessary. Max approached slowly. No sudden movement, no sound. He stopped a few feet away and sat, waiting. Aaron hesitated. His eyes moved from the dog to the door, then back again. Max did not move. Minutes passed. Then slowly the boy stepped forward. One step, then another. His hand lifted slightly, uncertain, trembling just enough to notice. Max lowered his head. The distance closed. Aaron's fingers touched the dog's fur. Soft at first, then firmer. Max leaned into the contact just enough to acknowledge it. The boy did not pull away. Ethan watched from a distance, his arms resting loosely at his sides. He understood then, not all at once, but enough. This was not about the past, not about the river or the storm, or the name he had only recently claimed. It was about this moment, this place, people who had been broken in different ways, finding something steady enough to stand on again. Ethan stepped outside as the sun lowered behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the ground. The air was cooler now, the scent of earth and wood settling into the quiet. Max followed, stopping beside him. They stood there without speaking. The river moved somewhere beyond the trees, Distant now, no longer pulling, no longer demanding. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Max's ears shifted slightly, but he remained still. For the first time, Ethan did not feel like someone who had been lost. He felt like someone who had arrived. Some stories are not about finding what was lost, but discovering what remained all along. Ethan spent his life believing he had been taken, forgotten, left behind by a world that never looked back. But the truth was quieter, deeper, and far more powerful. He had been searched for, loved, and carried forward in ways he never saw. Through hardship, through war, through silence, he did not become broken. He became someone who could stand when others could not. And sometimes, that is the greater purpose. Because the pain we carry does not end with us. It can become the bridge that leads someone else out of the dark. In a small town, with a loyal dog who never let go, Ethan didn't just find his past. He built a place where others could begin again. If this story spoke to you, stay with us on this journey. Subscribe, share, and be part of a community that believes no soul is ever truly alone. Thank you for being here, and may God guide your path, even in the moments you cannot yet understand.